The Witcher, one of the most popular gaming franchises of all time. But what if I told you that a series about fighting monsters, courting mages, and traveling between fantastical worlds filled with intrigue was hiding some of the most horrific, mind-bending, and unbelievable lore and theories you've ever seen?
For those of you that don't know, an iceberg is a deep dive into the most obscure and strange theories in all of our favorite universes. But my icebergs are a little different. Instead of just going down a list of pre-made theories, I look all over the internet for my favorite things about each universe and put it all into one video. So without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. For anyone that's played The Witcher 3, you've probably grown a love-hate relationship with your trusty steed, Roach. He's one of the most loyal and dependable horses out there, except for when he's falling off hills or getting caught on objects smaller than your bank account. Nonetheless, Roach is one of the now fan-favorite characters in the entire Witcher series for a good reason, and is a vital part of the now-beloved trilogy. What some players might not know about Roach, though, is that she's just one of many horses in Geralt's arsenal. You see, any horse that Geralt is currently using on his adventure throughout all the games and books is given the affectionate name Roach, but as to why, we aren't exactly sure. We know that Geralt prefers mares over steeds, which for those of you who don't know, mares are female horses and steeds male. But that makes us begin to ask, why the seemingly male name then? Well, the original name for Roach actually stems from a Polish word for fish, and judging by the fact that CD Projekt Red, the creators of the Witcher game series, are based in Poland, that's probably what Roach is actually supposed to refer to more, a feminine fish from the sea, rather than a nuclear-resistant cockroach. But that still doesn't answer the question of why every horse is named Roach. Some in the community have begun to speculate that Geralt may use it as some sort of emotional blocker to not get too attached to any one horse, calling them all roaches to maintain them as nothing special in his head. While others have argued that maybe the name Roach has some sort of special significance we aren't yet aware of. In the Witcher 3 Blood and Wine expansion, during one quest after drinking a particularly strong mead, we have what seems to be a vision of Roach talking to us outside.
Well, you're my human. Gotta be there when you need me. Yes, I'll be there for you, ooh, as the world falls down.
And while this is obviously mostly for comedic effect, we do get to hear Geralt inquire about how Roach is able to teleport around so quickly. We don't get any real answers here, but something about this scene just feels off. Could it be that Roach is actually hiding something a lot more sinister than a lot of us first assume? After all, why would this mare have such a deep male voice that coincidentally sounds somewhat like one of the maniacal demons we hear in game as well? Potentially the reason that Roach is able to appear behind us from seemingly out of nowhere whenever we call upon him and then vanish without a trace just as quickly is that he's actually hiding some sort of immense powers we haven't given thought. Based on that voice, maybe Roach is a demon, or even more likely, based on his ability to teleport instantly between time and space, he could even be a child of the Elder Blood, which would give Roach the same powers we see Ciri use in game, and would explain all those weird oddities with his character. I even have a theory that Roach could be a Jathilian, or rare horse spirit that grants its owner supernatural abilities and slowly takes over their minds, possessing them in a trance of sorts, almost like that scene we see in game. Either way though, whether Roach is just an endless series of random horses or a demonic elder blood god sent from another dimension to secretly trick Geralt into his ultimate demise, you can't argue with just how cute that face is. I'm probably in the large minority of people that actually prefer the story of Cyberpunk 2077 to The Witcher 3, but that doesn't mean they both aren't fantastic in their own way. However, what a lot of players might have missed is a moment in The Witcher 3 where we actually get to see a super awesome crossover between the two series. After finding Ciri near the end of the game alone in a hut in the Isle of Mist, her and Geralt catch up on what each of each other have been up to while they were apart. And during Ciri's speech, she talks about far away and distant worlds full of things Geralt can't even comprehend.
People there had metal in their heads, waged war from a distance, using things similar to megascopes. And there were no horses. Everyone had their own flying ship instead.
Siri, stop fooling around.
Considering that The Witcher 3 originally released in 2015, and the first teaser trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 was in 2013, it seems pretty clear that what Siri is referencing here is the world of Cyberpunk, with futuristic humans in an entirely new realm. There's further evidence for this theory too, because in Cyberpunk, during the All Along the Watchtower quest, near the end of the game, we get to stand with Pan Am over the Badlands Dam, and during this scene, we see a very small bird called a swallow perched on the car. For those of you who don't know, swallow is the Elvish to English translation of the word Ziriel in the Witcher universe, which is what Ciri's actual name derives from in the canon. This is especially interesting too because we know from some shards in Cyberpunk that there's supposed to be absolutely no birds in or around Night City. Take for example this one, titled Avian Extermination Act. In the face of increasingly frequent and deadly zoonotic disease outbreaks, the City Council has decided that the most effective method for reducing risk of infection among residents is via the extermination of all avian life within 18 miles of city limits. This likely means that the swallow on the car is a small Easter egg reference to Ciri being in the Cyberpunk universe during the time of V, and shows that there may be a lot more crossover potential between CD Projekt Red's two Juggernaut series in the future. As with most great works of fiction, The Witcher's lore and backstory takes a lot of inspiration from different sources, which means we can find similarities everywhere with other popular folktales. But maybe the most interesting connection of all is between The Witcher and the beloved classic, Shrek. You see, in Shrek we learn about how Lord Farquaad and Shrek himself aren't too keen on a lot of the fairy tale monsters coming into the realm, and multiple characters are hell-bent on getting rid of them at all costs. Sounds almost too familiar to the Witchers in the Witcher series. And not just that, but Shrek's most trusty companion by his side the whole time, Donkey, sounds eerily similar to Dandelion from The Witcher. A goofy side character used as comedic relief that almost doesn't fit into the story otherwise, but nonetheless plays a big part. Where this theory starts to get absolutely unbelievable though, and what almost no one knows about, is a real-world connection between The Witcher and Shrek. You see, one of the original technical leads on the Witcher 1 project was actually an avid fan of the Shrek series, which at the time was a massively popular franchise. And it was said that this led to a lot of inspiration for characters and world building we see to this day in the Witcher series. He was a raving fan of Shrek though, so much so that he actually started one of the biggest fan clubs online called It's All Ogre. And this is where it gets crazy, because many of the Witcher developers actually joined the fan club at the time, and as it grew, it eventually started to form into a cult of sorts, which horrifically in 2015 was actually indicted on human cannibalization and murder trials, where in South Dakota, a raving band of fat men painted head to toe in green called the Witchers attacked an entire town of I'm just messing with you guys. In most fantasy universes, large portions of the entire planet seem to be mapped out or understood. But one of the most fascinating things in the Witcher series that leads to a lot of it being such an engrossing world is just how much we don't know too. You see, the games and books of the Witcher series, so far at least, have all taken place in just one small part of an entire planet, in an area called the Continent. The Continent is home to the major ruling factions that we know and love of the Northern Kingdoms and Nilfgaard, and these lands are home to a variety of mountain ranges, fertile and open valleys and farmlands, as well as a huge assortment of biomes full of mythical monsters. To the north lies the Dragon Mountains, affectionately named so with a large amount of dragons that call it home, and it is said beyond these mountains lies entire kingdoms full of riches and powers that we know little about. To the east, we find a handful of massive mountain ranges that extend all the way from the north to the south, including the Blue Mountains, Fiery Mountains, and Tir Rakar, the home of the gnomes. East of these mountains, too, there are said to be massive bands of elves and elder races, along with never-before-seen creatures and tales that we only hear brief stories about, all because all of these mountain ranges are extremely difficult to traverse. And finally, to the west, we find the Great Sea, which is said to split the entire continent from even more massive and impressive undiscovered land masses to the west, full of even more crazy and interesting secrets on this mysterious planet. Based on research from the books, as well as other points of lore from the Witcher creators, it's been speculated by some that the entire continent landmass might look something like this, but from the games and books we only have a better understanding of this specific area here. As to what else is hidden on the entire planet, your guess is as good as anyone else's. But what makes the Witcher universe so amazing is just how little we know about the entire world and its secrets, and just how much more awesome lore this fantasy tale could be hiding. Luckily for us though, what we do have too is absolutely great. In the continent to the south lies the kingdom of Nilfgaard, which is ruled over by an emperor who is hell-bent on conquering as much land as possible. So much so that Nilfgaard now occupies almost half of the known continent, the entire southern portion, and is constantly looking for ways to take over more of the northern lands. Conquered lands' kings are established as vassals to the emperor and must live under the rule of Nilfgaard. And just above Nilfgaard, separated by the sprawling ML mountain ranges, lies a series of powerful and independent northern realms, all of which hate Nilfgaard only slightly more than they hate each other. The four most powerful kingdoms of the north consist of Redania, Temeria, Cadwin, and Adarn. Redania is known for its capital at Tretogar, along with its great Oxenfurt universities, and most prominently its trade port at Novigrad, full of riches and splendor. Temeria, their rivals to the south split only by the Great Pontar River, are known for their powerful military force and tactics, led by the king at the capital of Vizima along with some of the most well-known mage schools on the entire continent. To the east lies Cadwin and Adarn, also both split by the Great Pontar River. Cadwin is the largest of the four kingdoms, but is also home to the harshest conditions and lots of mountain ranges, which has resulted in many of its people becoming very hostile towards non-human races. Cadwin is also home to the Witchers, some of the fiercest and most feared fighters in all of the continent. And finally, Adarn is a kingdom ruled from its capital of Vengerberg, which has allied itself to the powerful kingdoms of Lyria and Rivia to the south to form one super conglomerate of forces and power. But beyond the four main kingdoms also lies a small selection of other lands ruled over by small assortments of power. To the east of Temeria lies the bundle of kingdoms including Sedaris, Karak, and Verdun, which all are home to non-stop conflicts and fights for power, each at one point becoming completely ruled over by one of the larger four main kingdoms. To the south lies Sintra, which borders against Nilfgaard and thus in recent history has been on constant high alert against Nilfgaardian aggression. But luckily they have formed an alliance with the Viking warlords to the west on the island of Skellige, which has the strongest navy in the known world. And finally to the north are the neighboring kingdoms of Povis and Kovir, full of rich port cities and mercenaries, as well as a conglomerate of duchies, or lands ruled over by dukes to the east known as the Hengefjords League, formerly a part of Kovir's Eastern Alliance before uprisings occurred. For those of you who are curious, by the way, here's a look at all the locations that we've been to in the Witcher games up to this point. You can see all the favorites of Witcher 3 like Skellige to the west, Kaer Morhen in the northeastern mountains, and places like Novigrad and Oxenfurt in Redania and Vizima in Temeria. In The Witcher Tales Thronebreaker, we also get a good look into Queen Meve of Lyria and Rivia, some of my favorite lands in the entire series. But regardless of your favorite place in the continent, the actual lore and history behind The Witcher is so fascinating, and it's a big reason why so much of the political intrigue and just general storytelling in the games and books is so good, because the world it's based on is so deep in and of itself. And we are only just getting started, because the world is home to a lot more than just human kingdoms and their infighting. After all, The Witcher is all about monsters. Many fans' favorite part of the Witcher series is just the simple adrenaline rush of hunting down a new and terrifying monster, one that we've never seen before, that poses a huge threat and maybe even greater rewards. And while we've had the pleasure of fighting many horrifying and fantastical creatures in our times playing the games, only a select few are truly unforgettable in their own way, and there are even more monsters we've seldom or never seen that are super fascinating as well. One of my personal favorites of these rarely seen monsters is the werewhales and werepigs. Not too dissimilar from werewolves, the werewhales and pigs are much less known adversaries and each have their own distinct features. In both cases, the human inflicted with the curse is able to transform either halfway or fully into the creature, which means yes, they can become human-whale hybrids with a whale for a head and human feet. This is where the similarities stop though, because while the werewhales are very docile and actually nice and intelligent creatures usually, the werepigs are known for being very ferocious and tough. In fact, by many accounts, most witchers actually find werepigs to be a much tougher opponent than werewolves, due to their immense strength and endurance. Either way though, both of these creatures in my opinion are a lot cooler than your just run-of-the-mill disturbing werewolf we see all the time. Speaking of disturbing imagery though, the botchlings are another creature that immediately comes to mind for most horrifying Witcher monsters. During the Bloody Baron questline of Witcher 3, we actually get to see one, and boy are they horrific. Botchlings are formed when there's an improper burial of unwanted or stillborn infants, which by the way, for those of you who don't know, is when a baby dies during birth and delivery. So in the Witcher world, when this situation is not handled properly, this baby will transform into a botchling, which if not dealt with, will grow into a monstrosity and massacre its parents, feeding off their life force. In order to deal with this properly, the botchling must be transformed into a lubberkin by performing an ancient elven naming ritual, followed by a proper burial beneath the family threshold, which is one option Geralt can take during this quest in game. Either way though, a botchling is a great example of just how dark the Witcher universe can really get, and shows that evil almost always begets more evil. Another crowd favorite that we got to see in The Witcher 3 as well is the Hymn. And while for a lot of people the Leshens or Caretaker are the scariest foe in the game, for me, this award goes to the Hymn. Because during the quest Possession in Skellige, which by the way is one of my favorite quests in the entire game, we actually get to interact with one firsthand. Hymns are one of the most dangerous types of demons in The Witcher, and can be seen as shadows on walls that creepily follow you around. They feed off an immense sense of guilt that a human being is feeling, and in the case of Possession, this comes from a man who let a boy named Aki die at sea. The Hymn tricks its hosts into hurting themselves or even offing themselves entirely, and the only way to stop this is either bringing the host to the Hymn and fighting it outright, or to trick the Hymn into going into a new host who feels true guilt, and killing it while it tries to do the transfer. And while you can use either method in game to accomplish your goal, the scariest part is just the idea of this demon becoming trapped in your mind and making you feel so guilty you can't help but not hurt yourself. In many ways, it's a real-world parallel to just how debilitating guilt and madness can really be. Another absolutely terrifying monster that we've seen in some cutscenes, as well in the live-action Netflix series, is the Bruxa. Bruxa are one of the most dangerous forms of vampires in the lore, and often take the form of dark-haired, young, and attractive females in order to lure in their unsuspecting foes and manipulate their minds, even bending their dreams into nightmares. The Bruxa's true form is actually that of a bat-like creature, the size of a human with super sharp fangs and claws that is exceptionally agile. This makes the Bruxa a very hard foe to deal with, and that is assuming you are able to even identify one properly, as it has been reported many times that women have been falsely accused of being Bruxa, only to meet an unfair early end. Should you get the chance to fight one though, only a silver sword can cause damage, and Bruxa can take an extensive beating before going down, meaning Witchers are one of the only people on the continent who can actually take down one single-handedly. And finally, maybe one of the most rotten creatures of all, and very unknown to most fans, is the Zeugl, something we only saw in The Witcher 1. Zeugls are known to inhabit and grow in sewers where they can grab anything in sight and funnel it into their enormous and teeth-ridden maw, from which their acidic stomachs will disintegrate anything instantly. They are large, almost potato-looking creatures that smell horrible and look even worse, and love to hide in dark environments where they are known to make blood-curdling screams. This makes them one of the most difficult monsters to deal with in general, and require great proficiency in order to actually best them, especially considering they are immune to almost all sword blows, regardless of if they are steel or silver. Removing the tentacles of the beast is the first step in taking it down and rendering it helpless for further punishment, but that is only assuming you are able to even get that far in the first place. The continent, or areas we know and love from the Witcher games, while fascinating, are only a very small look into the riveting history of the landmass. Because you see, long before humans conquered these lands and created the Nilfgaardian regimes and northern kingdoms that are constantly in conflict, there were so many other ancient and elder races that forged the world we now see today. Over 3,000 years before the arrival of the original humans, the continent was a very barren and desolate wasteland. That was until the very first sentient races started to form on the landmass and create societies. The strongest of these was known as the Vran, which were an extremely intelligent race of lizardmen who created massive and sprawling cities full of gold and wealth with roads that stretched across hundreds of miles in every direction. Side note, by the way, now that I've done a lot of these icebergs, it's funny that almost every fantasy world starts with a race of hyper-intelligent lizardmen that forge society and live in secret, and also they all have other similarities too, like an order of ancient warriors with magic abilities that you play as in game. If anyone knows where this all originally stems from, I would love to know. My guess would be Dungeons and Dragons or Lord of the Rings, but I'm not sure. But anyways, along with these Vran lizardmen were some other sentient but less powerful races like the werebugs, which were furry creatures with curved ears and extremely small in size that lived in constant fear of the Vran. And for over a millennia, this was how the societies of the continent were structured, with the Vran having supreme power overall. But around 2,500 years before the humans first made contact on the continent, the dwarves and gnomes also made landfall, with the gnomes coming sometime before the dwarves, each with some mysterious origin we're still not completely aware of. The gnomes and dwarves were both very short in stature, but while the gnomes were more skinny and agile, the dwarves were very beefy and strong, known for their prowess in battle. Both races were skilled in metallurgy, with the gnomes being the most famed of all across the continent, even in the modern days of the Witcher games. And dwarves also had some of the most massive and powerful forges to create some of the most devastating weapons in the entire landmass. The gnomes structured themselves in more communal and small tribes, while the dwarves created massive networks of rigid societal structures to gain power. Where things started to get really interesting though was around 2,000 years before the humans, because that's when the elves first made contact with the continent. The elves are a human looking and also very beautiful race that forms societies based on honor and success, and is also hiding a lot of super captivating backstory. You see, the elves originally stemmed from another world entirely, where they had power over the multiverse and jumped between worlds at a whim. Their technology and power was well beyond even our modern day human conception. But on their original homeworld, massive civil wars and infighting broke out, and caused the downfall of much of the race, leading to a massive division where the elves were split into two main groups, the Ahn'Sed and Ahn'El. After many years of infighting, an event called the Conjunction of the Spheres occurred, something we will touch on later after this section, but this event caused the breakdown of the multiverse entirely, and meant that the Ahn'Saed were sent to the world of the Witcher continent, and the Ahn'El were sent to a completely different world entirely. The Ahn'Saed at first landed far away from the continent and went through a time known as the Great Migration, where they had to sail through violent storms and barely survived in order to finally hit landfall. But when they finally did, they quickly started to take over the continent, using their superior technology and fighting skills to wipe out the Vran and their major cities, as well as pushing back the dwarves and the gnomes who preferred living in the mountain ranges anyways. Some ancient archaeological digs even suggest that the elves likely unleashed powerful magics that released contagions on the lands originally, which is probably the real reason they were able to win a victorious battle over all of the elder races so quickly. And from this point onward, the Ahn'Saed elves ruled over the continent and reformed those ancient Vran cities into their own, creating many of the great megastructures we see on the continent still to this day. But this reign would not last forever, because 2,000 years later, during an event known as the First Landing, the Nordlings, or original humans, landed to the north, and began to wage war on the elves, slowly over many years withering their forces down until the elves were finally defeated and their people were enslaved. And that leads us to the more modern and well-known events of the continent, where humans have taken over everything and have subjugated most of the other races, forcing many either into the mountains or away from the lands entirely, to places much less well surveyed. In The Witcher 3 specifically, the Wild Hunt, or your main adversaries, are actually those ancient Ahn'El elves that during the conjunction of the spheres teleported to a different planet, which they then conquered and became the rulers of. The reason the Wild Hunt chases Ciri in The Witcher 3 is actually that the Ahn'El elves are trying to capture her in order to use her elder blood to regain more control of their magics of teleporting between different multiverses like they used to be able to do so freely back in their heyday before the elves split into two tribes. It's crazy when you realize just how much backstory and lore there is in the Witcher universe. Whether it be wondering where the majority of the Ahn'Sed elves are now on the continent, asking just how powerful and different the Ahn'El are, questioning if there are still ancient Vran in hiding, or even just wondering what else is out there in the world of the continent and other multiverses entirely, The Witcher really does have some of the most fascinating and deep lore and world building out there. And we're only just getting started. Probably the biggest event in the entire history of the Witcher universe, the Conjunction of Spheres marked a cataclysmic period in time almost 1,500 years before the start of the books, where hundreds of different creatures and races from different dimensions combined into our own and spilled over into the real world we know from the games. This included the likes of the elves, ghouls, vampires, and even the very first human beings being transported into this new and mysterious land. The original naturally born races of the continent, like the Vran, dwarves, and gnomes, were quickly met with something they had never seen before. The elves of the Ahn'Saed tribe were thrust into our world and took over, and the first human beings that were said to have died out first appeared on the continent at this point, only for hundreds of years later the new humans, known as the Nordlings, to make landfall to the north and take over the entire continent we know from our modern day, with these being the actual humans we see in the Witcher games. And along with all these new beings and monsters suddenly being dropped into this new dimension, it's also the first point in time where the forces of chaos or magic began to spring into the world and were let loose. That's why in the Witcher lore, those who use magic are actually just tapping into these forms of chaos, of air, water, earth, and fire, because originally they were born of the conjunction of the spheres. And that means that mages in the universe are presumably really just pulling from the magics of the multiverse and parallel dimensions to bend the rules of time to their will, which by the way is another super common trope I see in a ton of fantasy games I've covered so far. But nonetheless, the conjunction of spheres in many ways raises more questions than it answers. First of all, I personally am super curious as to what exactly even caused this massive cataclysm in the first place. It would seem that it was simply born of natural causes and two universes and dimensions colliding with one another. But other lore points make me wonder about this. For example, the timing of the conjunction seemed almost too perfect for the elves, who had just destroyed their own kingdoms in civil war in their home dimension, and considering how much power they had over space and time, it seems plausible maybe a super powerful elven sorceress or team of them could have caused the original conjunction. On top of this, the actual event itself is still so shrouded in mystery. In fact, in each of the Witcher games and from different races and peoples, we get slightly different accounts as to what exactly happened, with some elven scholars even arguing that elves always existed on the continent and the only thing that came from the conjunction was the humans and other small non-combative creatures. Some historians explain it as a major event that shifted the very fabric of space and time itself, while others argue it was nothing more than new beings coming through portals and causing conflict. So that makes us begin to ask the question, did the conjunction simply open up a wormhole between existing dimensions, or did they smash into one another and create a new one entirely? Because one of the best ways to conceptualize how the Witcher universe works is imagining an infinite set of universes of spheres all floating around one another. The Elder Blood, like Ciri in The Witcher 3, is able to open up portals or wormholes between dimensions, and that's why at the end of The Witcher 3, we're able to actually travel to different worlds and see things that we've never even imagined in the Witcher games, which, side note, is my favorite part of the whole game. So either the conjunction of spheres was a massive wormhole being opened, or two of these spheres combining into a new reality. But if that's the case, then that makes me start to wonder if our conception of history itself on the continent is actually totally wrong. After all, the conjunction would have likely changed the fabric of reality itself, meaning the true history of our world and timeline may be lost forever. Other theories postulate that humans themselves actually caused the conjunction, as some prominent elves like Avallac'h tell Geralt that humans actually destroyed the elven homeworld originally, and that the elves actually used the conjunction as a way to flee to a new world, only for the humans to find them again. And even more terrifying than all of this, a new conjunction of spheres may soon be on the horizon, because during one of Witcher 3's lesser known quests, we may actually stumble upon a vampire encased in a tomb, and we're met with this hilarious and now memed moment.
Blood are glowing. Vampire. Probably regenerates here.
Just 5 more minutes. Is it 13:58 yet?
No.
Then fuck off.
The most interesting part of this encounter, though, is that when first waking the vampire up, he immediately asks if it's 13:58 yet. The reason this is significant is because we learn in the DLC that vampires are patiently waiting for a new conjunction of the spheres, hoping that their portals back to their home world will open up so that they can finally leave the persecution of the continent. And this vampire asking if it's 13:58 yet may just imply that they know of a coming conjunction cataclysm we don't yet. Either way, the conjunction of the spheres is without a doubt one of the most fascinating and mysterious pieces of lore in the entire Witcher universe, and leads the series to so many awesome, almost sci-fi-like stories, which I personally love. Maybe humanity has existed for billions of years, traveling from dimension to dimension, causing chaos, and our modern-day humanity has forgotten this horrific past. Maybe the elves are more sinister than we thought. Maybe the magics of the world are actually us siphoning energy from helpless souls in other dimensions. Or maybe something even more powerful is at play here, a godlike figure. And it's those questions that make the Witcher universe as special as it is, one where not only are the small character tales and people we meet in the games and books so intriguing, but the world and meta-narrative is just as riveting too. As we already know, there are many monsters, both creature and human alike, in the world of The Witcher. But maybe one of the most terrifying of them all was just under our noses the whole time. You see, we already know in our real world, cats, the objectively worst version of dogs, are hellspawn determined to make human lives a living nightmare. But what might come as a surprise is that in the world of The Witcher, it may not be so different. Cats have always played a weird role in the Witcher games, with many cutscenes specifically zooming in on cats in the environment that seem to be watching and following Geralt around. This has led to famous cats like Nibbles that appear all over the games wherever Geralt is, and Nibbles even made an appearance in Cyberpunk 2077 as well. Many in the community have begun to speculate that cats actually could be Dopplers, or polymorph sorcerers spying on the civilian populations and Geralt. But maybe the real theory is even more strange. Because cats in the Witcher universe have a lot more going on than meets the eye. First of all, many times we see cats sleep where lines of power cross, something all other animals avoid religiously. And even more interestingly, cats are the only animals in game that are also able to absorb magic. As we know from in-game lore text from all the games, any creatures that have magical properties are able to sense Witchers, and this could potentially explain why cats are also oftentimes seen hissing, running away, or watching Geralt. And there's another smoking gun too. Because in all of the games and books, we have never, in all of the extensive lore, seen any cats bearing a silver collar or object, instead only refusing to get near them. This is important because in the Witcher universe, all beasts are unable to bear silver and it weakens them, because they are impure creatures coming into contact with one of the purest forms of metal, silver, which coincidentally is why when fighting monsters in game, we use Geralt's second sword made of silver instead of the steel one we use for human engagements. And finally, in one quest in The Witcher 3, we actually can meet a man who believes he was cursed after trying to eat his cat, which once again makes us ask if cats are able to curse people out of their own volition. So it seems pretty clear that we are getting strong signals that cats in the Witcher universe are actually monsters just like any other. And if true, means we should be slaying these pesky felines whenever we come across them in game. And for all you cat lovers out there, get fucked. Nah, cats are cute. Sometimes. The world of The Witcher is full of many prophecies and omens that tell of great abundance or horrific downfalls of the future. But maybe one of the most important of all of these is known as Ithleen's prophecy from the books. Ithleen was a powerful elven prophet from long ago who predicted the ending of the world The Witcher takes place in, an event known as the White Frost, a cataclysmic ice age that would result in almost everyone dying. In the books, her prophecy reads as so: "Verily I saw unto you, the era of the sword and the axe is nigh, the era of the wolf's blizzard. The time of the white chill and the white night is nigh, the time of madness and the time of contempt. Ted Derrida, the time of the end. The world will die amidst frost and be reborn with the new sun. It will be reborn of elder blood, of Hen Ichar, of the seed that has been sown, a seed which will not sprout, but burst into flame." So in the books, it's said that 3,000 years after the events with Geralt and the characters we know and love, a great ice age would take over the planet and kill absolutely everything, only to be followed by a new sun being born that will bring about an entirely new age of great splendor and wonder. It's argued by some that the only way to stop this would be for the Elder Blood to be used to open up wormholes to another dimension and a world that everyone on the continent could travel to. But in the games, the White Frost itself actually takes a much different form. Because you see, in the games, the White Frost is actually a much more ephemeral force, whereas in the books it's simply a prophecy for one planet with no other significance. In the games, the White Frost is something more akin to godlike powers or divine intervention, where a never-ending cold snap is known to travel from planet to planet and plunge worlds into total chaos and desolate wastelands of frost for miles on end. In fact, in The Witcher 3, the NL elves, or Wild Hunt, are actually trying to use Ciri to create a portal to the world the continent is on using her Elder Blood. That way they can escape their own world, which is currently being consumed by the White Frost. At the very end of The Witcher 3, we can see Ciri actually take on the White Frost herself, and somehow stops it from consuming our world, regardless of what ending we get. So while the books and games have a slightly different take on the White Frost, the core tenets of a powerful cataclysm destroying our whole planet is consistent. And if we believe the game's slightly more interesting take on this, it makes us begin to wonder what the White Frost even is. Could it be that the White Frost is actually a powerful god who seeks vengeance on worlds who have sinned, or maybe just worlds that have lived too long? Is the White Frost something that is bound to happen on every planet in every dimension? And if it is, then how exactly did Ciri even stop it? Because we never actually learn about what she did. Even in the Empress ending where we do get to see her again, we get no closure. So maybe this is something that will be touched on in The Witcher 4, and I certainly hope it is, because it's one of the most interesting and potentially massively important plot points in the entire series, because without understanding the White Frost properly, it may just lead to the downfall of not only the entire human race, but the entire history of one of the greatest fantasy worlds of all time. With just as Ithleen's prophecy foretold, a new world being born of a son of fire, with all of our past, including Geralt's, being gone forever. A harrowing idea, for sure. The Witchers are some of the most feared, yet also sought after people on the entire continent of the games and books, and that's for good reason. You see, the Witchers are bred for one thing and one thing only, and that's monster slaying. And considering just how many strange and varied creatures there are across all of the lands since the conjunction of the spheres, the service Witchers provide is invaluable for many average folk protecting themselves, as well as powerful kings and political leaders looking to gain an edge over their opponents. And while there are many rumors on the earliest days of the Witchers and how they began, what we do know for sure is that almost all of Witchers in history, in order to become one of the revered fighters, have to go through many trials that usually result in death. Predominantly as children, young wannabe Witchers would first need to undergo what is called the choice, where they would decide to embark on the path to becoming a Witcher, learning to follow a strict diet of mushrooms, mosses, and herbs, all while undergoing grueling physical training. Even in this first step, many recruits would die due to liver or heart failures as well as madness, but things would only get worse for those that did make it past the choice. Because after this, young Witchers would undergo three main trials: the Trial of the Grasses, the Trial of the Dreams, and the Trial of the Mountains. In the Trial of the Grasses, a recruit would be tied down and tortured on a table while injecting countless chemicals and herbs, including nightshade, speargrass, and wolfsbane. On top of this, excessive amounts of mutagenic elixirs were mixed into their blood as well, which results in the recruits screaming in agony for days on end, with only a very small portion of them even surviving the process entirely. For those that do survive, they gain the mutagens Witchers are known for, along with increased and lightning-fast reflexes, slower aging, and sharper senses. After this, the recruits must undergo the Trial of the Dreams, where supervising druids and mages will force them into a series of psychedelic visions meant to hone trainees' abilities, including the ability to see during the night. Sadly though, this trial also is what results in all Witchers becoming sterile, no longer being able to have offspring. And finally, the Trial of the Mountains, referred to as the Trial of the Medallion by Witchers in the School of the Wolf, is more of a final exam that puts all of the trainees' learnings and teachings to the test, where they must undergo and conquer some great feat in order to then become a full Witcher. And for those that the Master has doubted, there's even one more trial called the Trial of the Sword, where the trainee must fight a great monster that the Master chooses, or another Witcher, to the death. Only by conquering this last trial, if called upon, can a trainee become a full-fledged Witcher themselves. On top of this too, not all Witchers even belong to the same school. Geralt, who we play as in the games, belongs to the School of the Wolf, with other prominent schools being the School of the Cat, Bear, Viper, Griffin, and many more, including some that may have been forgotten and lost to the trials of time entirely, something we'll touch on later on this list. And each of these schools has their own practices and fortress, with Kaer Morhen being home to the School of the Wolves, meaning while all Witchers are powerful and slay monsters, not all are the same, or even have the same exact training and experiences, with some said to be much harder than others, like say the School of the Bear and their especially grueling Trial of the Mountain. So not all Witchers are the same then, and no Witcher proves that more than Geralt, because what a lot of players might not know is that Geralt is actually potentially the most interesting Witcher of all time. You see, during Geralt's trials to become a Witcher in the School of the Wolf, he displayed an unreal resistance to each step. So much so that he was given experimental tests and mutagens that gave him almost superhuman ability and strength, and caused his hair to be stained white forever. What was so special about this though is not that it happened. A handful of Witchers previously had undergone these experimental trials due to displaying powerful abilities, but Geralt is the only Witcher in recorded history to have actually survived all of them, meaning he is without a doubt most likely the strongest and most powerful Witcher that's ever lived. As to why this is though, no one's exactly sure. It could be that Geralt is the Michael Jordan of Witchers, or something a lot more mystical is going on, potentially something we may learn about in future games. One of the best parts of the Witcher series is just how varied the locations are. And that's even excluding the multiverse and its infinite amount of otherworldly finds, because even just on the continent, there's so much to explore and love. And probably the most beautiful, vibrant, and potentially unique places in all of the Witcher series we've seen so far at least is Toussaint. Featured in the Blood and Wine DLC for The Witcher 3, Toussaint is almost a fairy tale come to life, with giant and sprawling vistas, lush greenery as far as eye can see, and massive mountains and towns bustling with life. The entire zone just gives off a feeling of abundance and health, and it's in stark contrast to the more melancholy tones we see almost everywhere else in the series, a great change of pace for a lot of fans. But while on the surface Toussaint seems to be a dream location with no faults, beneath it all lies some of the most disturbing creatures and characters, and potentially even a coming Armageddon no one's prepared for. You see, one of the reasons Toussaint is so wealthy and abundant, and also why so much of the wildlife is so lush, is because as we learn from the books, the entire area is absolutely littered with volcanic soil. And for those of you that don't know, oftentimes volcanic soil is super rich in minerals that are vital in replenishing the dirt, meaning some of the best crop yields and most beautiful places even on Earth are the result of massive volcanic eruptions long ago. And in the case of Toussaint, it very much seems this is the case. Where it gets concerning though is just how much of the duchy is covered in this abundant soil of the past. It isn't just the mountains or close to them, it seems to be almost the entire area itself that has been affected. And this suggests that when the volcano did erupt, it must have been an event of massive and almost unimaginable proportions. There's further evidence too of this in-game if we look at Mount Gorgon, the tallest peak in Toussaint. It seems to be reminiscent of Mount St. Helens after its famed eruption that sent shockwaves around the world in our real lives. Could this be CD Projekt Red trying to signal to us that this peak may be hiding a sinister past? We know too in-game that Mount Gorgon is usually associated with pure evil, and has been a symbol of bad omens for the people of Toussaint for many years now. Potentially Toussaint itself could actually be one huge caldera, with molten magma flowing just underneath the surface in all of the duchy, all being controlled by some evil force at the helm of Mount Gorgon, simply biding its time until the next massive eruption, which this time could be so large it could send the entire continent back into the Stone Ages. It's crazy to think that in a world full of blood-sucking vampires, multi-dimensional unicorn gods, and this absolute unit, that maybe the most terrifying thing of all is just Mother Nature itself. One of the things that makes the Witcher world so believable is just how many parallels to our real existence it has. And maybe there's no better example of this than the drug Fistek. In the games and books, Fistek is supposed to be an analogy of sorts to cocaine, and is a white powdery substance sometimes referred to as white death by the elves, which usually is snorted or placed under the gums, or for those of you more adventurous, the flaps of skin in more secluded areas. The drug is said to give the user a strong sense of euphoria, and can be extremely potent, oftentimes immediately knocking out users and acting as a strong anesthetic, which is why it's oftentimes used in outlawed medical procedures. In some instances, particularly strong concoctions were said to have even caused hallucinations in their users, which could alter their mind completely forever. And we know how strong this drug really is from the couple of times we've seen it in the games and books, like when Ciri was drugged by an adversary. In terms of its production though, almost no one even knows how to make Fistek, because it's an extremely carefully guarded secret sealed away by the biggest crime bosses on the continent, who rely on Fistek in order to make large sums of money. Even the elves seem to regard the drug as pure evil and seldom will talk about it, and this implies that Fistek really is one of the worst substances out there. But that makes us begin to wonder what exactly this white powder really even is. And what about those hallucinations? Are there different forms of this drug being mixed or cut with other potent things depending on the crime syndicate? And not only that, but because of its nature as a stimulant, could it be that many warriors and crime underlings are actually secretly being fed this drug in order to fight without fear? It certainly would explain why so many people in the game are willing to fight such a powerful Witcher like Geralt when they stand no chance. Either way, I would love to see the lore dive more into Fistek in the future, and explore what it really is and the secretive underground crime rings and world that revolves around its production and mystical properties. While the Witcher games for the most part have done a great job of staying true to the source material from the books and the events that happen there, that doesn't mean that everything has carried over. And one of the best examples of this is one very notable character, known as False Ciri. False Ciri, or Cirilla Fiona, in the books was a refugee and war orphan who looked almost exactly like the real Ciri. And it's because of this that she was used by multiple powerful leaders or groups to try and protect the real Ciri and her immense powers, acting as a decoy of sorts that would lead people astray. Considering just how powerful Ciri is as well, with her elder blood and ability to instantly teleport between different dimensions, having an imposter like this could prove absolutely invaluable in making sure she doesn't fall into the wrong hands. In The Witcher 2, we actually find a letter to the Nilfgaardian Emperor Emir that mentioned the false Ciri. But besides this, we never actually get to see or hear about her in any of the other games. And in The Witcher 3 specifically, she seems to have been forgotten about entirely. Many in the community have speculated that in the games we can presume that she died at some point off screen, and we just haven't heard any mention of it. But potentially the false Ciri could actually still be out there, and could even play a pivotal role in some future content we've yet to see. Some even more absurd theorists have speculated that the Ciri we see in the games may have actually been the false Ciri the entire time, with all the teleportation and flashbacks being nothing more than an illusion cast from a powerful mage, maybe even Avalok himself. Imagine if the reason we never see the false Ciri in game is because she was right next to us the whole time, under the command of some nefarious force, tricking Geralt into following the wrong path to the real Ciri. And while I think this theory is way too far out there, if somehow it did become true, it for sure would be a plot twist for the ages to learn that the entirety of Witcher 3's story was nothing but a lie. To me, some of the most fascinating lore and theories in any game I cover always seems to focus more on what we don't know rather than what we do. And some of the best places that can pull at the fabrics of our imagination in that sense are lands not yet discovered. And in the case of The Witcher, we have that in droves. As we already discussed, the Witcher games take place on the continent, or massive landmasses bordered by a sprawling sea to the west and south, as well as imposing and inhibiting mountain ranges to the east and north. Because of this, the only actually fully mapped out regions and zones are those of the Nilfgaardian Empire and free northern kingdoms. The question naturally then becomes, though, what exactly lies beyond the borders of the known world? To the west across the sea is what is theorized to be a massive western continent, sometimes referred to as the New World or New Continent, that crosses countless miles of treacherous water that is filled to the brim with horrifying and dangerous monsters. Fabio Sachs, an early explorer, actually has tried to map out some of these lands, and discovered that they were populated with many new flora and fauna never before seen, as well as some familiar faces like vampires of tribe Amurim. It seems that the entirety of this new continent is even more dangerous than what we know of from the one in the Witcher games, and includes coastal cities, massive and hot deserts, and lush jungles. But we still only know of minor details about this place. We know that it was split into multiple countries, that's home to many great wonders of the world, and that's almost impossible to understand for outsiders. As to whether or not we'll actually ever get to visit this location in a future game or novel though, only time will tell. On top of these lands to the west though, we also know that even closer to the main continent lies other kingdoms and secret locations just to the east. The mountain ranges bordering the continent have resulted in almost no one traveling between them, at least extensively, and it's even believed by some that early humans on the continent that were driven out by elves before the Nordlings arrived may have actually escaped eastward. To the east beyond the mountain ranges lies multiple massive and unique kingdoms like Zerrikania, Korath Desert, and Hochland, each with their own distinct architecture, customs, and peoples or monsters. Zerrikania specifically is said to be a massive human realm home to deserts and wastelands, full of warrior women, dragon cults, and exotic beasts. Early life in these lands was said to consist of visits from ancient dragons bearing secrets and words of wisdom, but as time went on they began to become more and more infrequent. At one point, the Zerrikanians even made contact with Witchers, who they contracted to help protect their massive caravans going through the lands, and these Witchers later went on to become known as the School of the Manticore. But over time, civility in the land began to break down, and the kingdom resorted to mercenaries to populate most of its armies, which oftentimes can lead to ruin, and thus lots of infighting and civil war broke out, all during the time that the northern wars were taking place to the west that would eventually lead to what we know as the modern-day continent. Zerrikania itself also birthed an entirely different culture of humans than we're familiar with a language that's more similar to Elder speech along with customs and traditions describing things never before seen. Society there is matriarchal, with most positions of power being held by women, and the entire realm is ruled over by one all-powerful queen. Education, religion, and magic are all core tenets of this society, and this means that while they are different, they're also potentially just as strong as their human neighbors across the mountains. There have been countless novels and lore entries about the Zerrikanians and countless other empires to the east, but still to this day they are mostly shrouded in mystery as to what they're actually like, with a lot of so-called facts being nothing but rumors and hearsay. Maybe at some point in the future we will finally get to explore the lands to the east, or even across the sea to the west, and discover just how deep the Witcher universe really is. Or maybe these places are better left untouched. After all, sometimes it's what we don't see, and how our imaginations fill those gaps, that make a world so great. While maybe the most famous version of The Witcher nowadays is the games from CD Projekt Red, originally the lore and backstory for all of these amazing RPGs came from Andrzej Sapkowski's novels. And the second novel written, and also the book that is the very first if you're going in chronological order, is called The Last Wish. In the games and books, The Last Wish refers to a time when Geralt first met Yennefer of Vengerberg, one of his main romantic interests. Early in the novels, Geralt comes into contact with a djinn, or basically a witcher genie, and it grants him 3 wishes. But after his first wish almost gets himself and his friend Dandelion killed, he seeks out a sorceress to help him handle this sinister djinn instead. And in the finale of the novel, after meeting with Yennefer and having her help him, she actually tries to capture the djinn herself, in order to grant her wish of becoming fertile again, that way she can have children, something she lost in the process of becoming a powerful sorcerer, similarly to how Geralt lost his fertility becoming a witcher. But Geralt, realizing that the djinn would trick Yennefer and kill her, instead makes his final wish, something no one but Geralt is able to hear, and in a flash, the djinn disappears and leaves Yennefer safe, after which they both engage in some of the most raunchy fornication the Witcher series has ever seen. The real mystery around The Last Wish, though, comes from what exactly did Geralt say on that fateful day. For many years, it was completely up to interpretation, and many theories were widely speculated on. But sometime after the book was first released, Andrzej Sapkowski did clarify that in The Last Wish, Geralt asked for Yennefer and his destinies to be intertwined somehow, but he never elaborated further. This makes perfect sense though, because since Geralt originally found the djinn, if he wished for his fate to be tied with that of Yennefer's, then the djinn could not kill Yennefer, since a djinn could not harm its master, or person who discovers them. So by making their fates one and the same, killing Yennefer would kill Geralt, meaning the djinn can do nothing. And while this is a cool revelation in The Last Wish on its own, the deeper implications some in the community have speculated on might be even more interesting. Because you see, what exactly could the djinn do to even tie together the fates of Yennefer and Geralt? They do constantly seem to run into one another afterwards till the end of time, but Yennefer is hardly the only character, let alone sorceress love interest, that Geralt shares that quality with. So maybe that last wish that Geralt made was something that only he and Yennefer could share. Remember how after the djinn left, Geralt and Yennefer immediately started going to town on one another? Could it be that Geralt's last wish, the one that would ultimately bind him and his true love together forever, thus saving both of their lives, was that he wanted to have a child with her? After all, both Geralt and Yennefer are not fertile, meaning if they were somehow able through the magic of the djinn to have a child, then they would for sure be bound in their fates together in a way they could never do again with another living human being. To me, this is surely the most poetic and awesome answer to the Last Wish riddle. But then that makes us begin to wonder why we never heard more about this child, and why does Yennefer and Geralt not talk about it more in the games or books? Maybe there's a secret so deep within both of them that they seldom talk about it in person when together, a last wish for only Geralt and Yennefer to know, one that even the players who command Geralt will never truly understand. While the world of The Witcher is utterly fascinating with all of its lore and history, the thing that actually draws most people in, at least when they first play the games or read the books, is the characters. People who not only show bouts of heroism and selflessness, but also more menacing and ominous individuals who display characteristics more befitting of a demon rather than a human being. And speaking of demons, probably one of my favorite villains in the whole series is the one and only Gaunter O'Dim from the Hearts and Stone DLC for The Witcher 3. He's a character we actually first meet right at the start of the base game in the tavern in White Orchard, who knows a little too much about our friends and goals, but simply helps us and says that maybe one day our paths will cross again. And lo and behold, they do much later on. Gaunter O'Dim, also known as the Master of Mirrors or Man of Glass, is an extraordinarily powerful individual who is known to create pacts with people in exchange for their very souls. Should someone break their pact, their life and very essence itself will forever belong to Gaunter. In-game, we even at one point get to see O'Dim quite literally control the fabric of time and space itself, with nothing more than a clap, freezing everyone around him except for Geralt as he speaks with him in private.
Don't make me beg. It's my treat.
Show off.
Of course I am. Wouldn't you be? Time's a marvelous plaything.
And a great spice to use in gingerbread.
So, you were listening.
So obviously this mysterious man is more than meets the eye, and his powers and fixation on souls has led many in the community to believe that he may actually be a very powerful demon that is running rampant on the continent. We even in-game get to hear some characters like Shakeslock exclaim that Gaunter is quite literally evil incarnate and could wrought destruction for the entire world. But during our time spent with him, Gaunter has a lot more depth than just a maniacally evil caricature. He seems to display a love of watching the suffering and pain of others, but as far as we know, any instance in which this occurs, by his hands at least, is always due to technically noble or just causes. It would appear that he never lies, cheats, or steals, but rather abides by his contracts and promises very strictly. So should you cross him or break an oath, he will subject you to some of the strangest and most disturbing horrors out there. As to who the man really is though, many in the community theorize that Gaunter may actually be the devil himself. You see, the story we play out in the Hearts and Stone DLC with Gaunter as the main protagonist has a ton of striking similarities to the Polish folktale of Pan Twidarski, who is a man who makes a deal with the devil to gain mystical powers like summoning his dead wife, who in the end meets a tragic fate and loses his soul to pure evil itself. So could it be that Gaunter O'Dim is a devil or deity of sorts? It certainly would explain his control over space and time itself, and would also clarify why this strange man seems to know everything about Geralt even before meeting him. Another piece of evidence for this theory is actually the man's name itself, because the 3 letters that start each part of Gaunter O'Dim's name actually spell out God, which could be another hint that we are dealing with an all-powerful force here. In fact, we essentially get confirmation of this based on the very last things Gaunter O'Dim says at the end of the DLC. Because right at the end of the Heart and Stone storyline, we have the choice to either save or abandon Von Everec, who Gaunter has made a contract with. If we abandon Von Everec, then Gaunter gets his soul, but if we agree to take O'Dim on in a final challenge of wits to save Everec's soul, and we succeed, we are met with this final cutscene of Gaunter O'Dim speaking in a strange language and then disappearing.
Gotcha. Be gone. You've lost.
What you are hearing is a form of Elder Speech, or ancient tongue of the Witcher universe, and it's been widely theorized by many fans that CD Projekt Red actually based this speech off of medieval Georgian languages, and if we go off of this assumption, this final speech can roughly be translated to, "You are insignificant. You think you have defeated me, but you are wrong. I can't be killed. I will be back." This foreboding final message from O'Dim seems to imply that he will return at some point. And even more, if what he's saying is true, then surely O'Dim is some sort of all-powerful deity, potentially even God or the devil themselves. But we still have so many questions about this mysterious character. Is Gaunter actually an evil incarnate, or is his real purpose much more deep? After all, he only seems to hurt people who have hurt others. But then the question becomes, why is he even doing all of this in the first place? We also know that Gaunter heavily relies on trickery, always granting a wish exactly as people say it in words and not as they intended it. Could he potentially be some sort of manifestation of life and consequence itself? After all, it seems that everyone O'Dim goes after is someone who foolishly is saying things they want without realizing the consequences. So maybe O'Dim is merely a manifestation of the human condition and its failures of hubris, and his control over time and space can be explained because Gaunter O'Dim is time and space itself, which also would explain why he can never be killed, because he's an idea, not a man. This would also fit really well with many ancient portrayals of Satan and the devil in Christianity, where he was originally supposed to be a being that craved justice and consequences instead of just being maniacally evil. Either way, while we still don't know who exactly Gaunter O'Dim is, it's clear that his motives and intentions aren't so black and white. And considering how things are left off with his character, it's clear we might see him in an upcoming sequel or game, which I would love to see. Because sometimes the best villains are ones who always just leave enough room for you to think they might just be doing something good. One thing that seems to be a staple of the majority of medieval and fantasy worlds nowadays is that they almost always appear to be stuck in one time period. While there's thousands of years of complex and gripping history and lore of different empires and magics that envelop the world, the thing that seems to be sorely missing is a real sense of progression. It's almost like no matter what happens, and no matter how many advancements are made, society itself will always be in the same rigid medieval structure that we've grown to be familiar with. But in The Witcher, there's a lot of signs pointing to the fact that the entire entire continent and series may be on the verge of a massive scientific revolution that could fundamentally change everything. For starters, in the Witcher universe, vaccines and antibiotics, or ways of preventing sickness, are becoming common. In the third game, for example, we can actually help Keira Metz find the cure for the Catriona plague, which is actually just the real-world bubonic plague that Ciri brought to the Witcher world after visiting our own and bringing back a diseased flea. Another example of scientific advancement is places sprouting up like Oxenfurt University, which is home to advanced lectures on math, literature, alchemy, and medicine, all while incorporating lots of seemingly enlightened philosophies like a focus on arts and beauty. Could it be that the Witcher universe is actually on the verge of its own renaissance? On top of this, there's so many new inventions and technologies being worked on throughout the lore, like large-scale teleportation devices Yennefer mentions in the games and books, and even a Professor Oppenhauser at Oxenfurt who successfully made a working perpetual motion machine before it was destroyed when the sorceresses took down Stygia Castle. All this could point to the fact that the Witcher universe is taking from different time periods in our real world, and also that during the conjunction of the spheres, maybe some of this technology and knowledge was ported over. But I like to think that also this really is a turning point in the Witcher universe for the continent to start its own sort of enlightenment that may eventually lead to large-scale machinery and computers. Maybe during The Witcher 6, we'll even be fighting with rocket launchers and machine guns. I'm not sure that would go over well with fans. While my favorite character in the Witcher series would have to be Geralt himself, with his no-nonsense one-liners and suave demeanor, a close second, for me at least, is Vesemir. Because throughout the series, Vesemir plays a key role in being a father figure of sorts to Geralt, as well as most of the remaining Witchers at Kaer Morhen. He is a man of honor, dignity, family, and hard work, and expects the most out of everyone he is close with, while also always being willing to lend a helping hand, either physically or emotionally. And for anyone that's beat The Witcher 3, you know one of the saddest moments in the entire game is the sacrifice that Vesemir makes in order to protect Ciri and Geralt, dying at the hands of the Wild Hunt at Kaer Morhen. But what a lot of players probably don't know is that just before this sequence in game where you must defend a great onslaught, you can actually follow Vesemir around the castle and catch him downstairs and ask an otherwise hidden dialogue option that almost all players have missed out on.
So, ready for battle? How do you feel?
Old. If things don't go as planned, take Ciri and run. As far away from here as you can.
Not a chance. Won't abandon you.
It's not a request, Geralt.
I know, but I'm not your student anymore.
Shame you aren't. Because it seems there's something I failed to teach you. That at times, you can't win without making a sacrifice.
These final words from Vesemir are a big foreshadowing of things to come, and show that deep down, Vesemir likely already knew this moment was coming, and it makes his sacrifice even more noble, knowing that his biggest concern was always not about himself, but for those around him he loved. A great hidden moment for one of the best characters in the entire series. The Curse of the Black Sun is a tale in the Witcher universe that a lot of people might not know about, even though it's one of the most captivating out there. You see, many years ago there was a man named Eltibald who prophesied that soon a solar eclipse would occur, known as the Black Sun, that with it would transform 60 of the girls born under it into cruel and foul creatures that would bring about the destruction of the world. He was a genius and sage to some, and to others nothing but a rambling and maniacal elder who had fallen into madness due to some ailment. But Eltibald was adamant from his studies of ancient Dock tombstones and Wozgor necropolises that this mythology would come true. And this omen led many in the surrounding communities to live in constant fear of the event. So when the next solar eclipse did in fact occur, with the sky turning black, many exclaimed that the prophecy was coming true and that the evil goddess Lilith was to rise again and purge humanity. Because of this, 60 girls born during this event were hunted down mercilessly. Some were killed, while others were given live autopsies to study strange mutations they had as their screams filled the void. But with time it was decided that with only a few of these girls left, they should instead be imprisoned in a tower in order to isolate them from society for further study. This plan didn't work though, as too many princes and men of power began to lust after the beautiful woman, and one by one they were saved from the tower and their own prison. And in an almost self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, these women that did escape went on to torture and kill many people in their wake, due to the horrors and traumas that they had endured in their entire childhood. In fact, some characters we meet in-game, like Sylvia Anna from the Witcher 3 Blood and Wine DLC, are actually girls from the Curse of the Black Sun event, which shows many have gone on to amass great power. The real questions about this event, though, revolve around whether or not these girls actually were and are a threat to the world. In the original prophecy, it was made clear that at some point, these women, because of their strange mutations, were to transform into monsters that would bring about the demon goddess Lilith, also worshipped under the name Nia, who would then pave the continent in the blood of man. And while we haven't seen any signs of Lilith's return yet, it is strange that the girls that were originally captured and experimented on did have many unknown and confusing mutations in their blood that doctors and mages alike could not understand. But it's also just as likely that these were simply innocent girls who were thrust into a life of torture due to one man's insane ramblings, and then went on to do more evil because of the evil that had been done to them. My guess would be that most of these girls were wrongly accused, but that maybe amongst them lies some truth, an omen to a demon who soon may rise and bring about the end of the world, something that certainly would be fun to explore in future games. While the last couple of years have been a tumultuous time for CD Projekt Red with the catastrophic release of Cyberpunk 2077 and the ensuing drama, recently things have been looking good. And one of the things that has people most excited about the future of the company was the recent announcement that The Witcher 4 is being developed in Unreal Engine 5. We haven't seen much of the game as of the time of writing this script, but what we have seen has led to a lot of speculation in the community. During the original announcement of the game, this promotional art was released showing a Witcher medallion in the snow with the phrase, "A new saga begins." But what at first seems like a fun reveal may actually be hiding a big secret, because that medallion in the snow is unlike any other we have seen in the games or books. You see, each Witcher within the universe wears a medallion that signifies which Witcher school they came from. For example, we can see in the games Geralt wearing a wolf's medallion to signify that he comes from the School of the Wolf, founded by Barman and currently headed by Vesemir. But the medallion in the snow picture is actually that of a lynx, and the reason that's so significant is we have never heard of or seen any such school in the Witcher lore before. We know of many other prominent schools like that of the cat, viper, and wolf, but there are also many others that have been forgotten to time. So could this lynx medallion actually be a clue that we will be playing as a band of long-lost and forgotten Witchers and a school teaching things we have never seen before? One prominent theory in the community right now postulates that the School of the Lynx may actually even be an offshoot of the School of the Cat. Lynx and cats are both felines, so the connection seems immediately obvious, but considering that all Witchers in the School of the Cat were apparently killed during the attack on Stygia Castle, this seems unlikely. That is until we read this entry from the Witcher card game Gwent about the Witchers during the attack on Stygia Castle, which reads, "As for those who were not present during the attack, they continue to roam the world's roots, embittered, hungry for vengeance, with nothing left to lose." So could it be that, contrary to popular belief, some of the Witchers from the School of the Cat did survive and have gone on to found a new school based on entirely new principles and foundations that will lead to the creation of whatever Witcher we play as in this new series? In my opinion, this would be an awesome way to begin a new trilogy, as it would give us a lot of familiar foundations while also leaving room for a lot of experimentation and new customs in the Witcher Bible. Either way, we'll just have to wait and see. While Toussaint might be the most beautiful place we can travel to in The Witcher 3, beneath all of its sugarcoating is potentially one of the most startling revelations in the entire series. We already discussed how Toussaint may be home to a massive networks of volcanoes and underground lava, but Mother Nature isn't the only thing to worry about in this pseudo-paradise. Because throughout our time in Toussaint, it becomes very clear that vampires play a very big role in the area. Many are being summoned all across the zone, with tons of reports of missing and kidnapped townsfolk cropping up everywhere. On top of this, Toussaint is also home to the most powerful vampire we have met yet, named the Unseen Elder, a title granted to him due to his name not truly being known, and his legacy as one of the very old higher vampires that have inconceivable powers of strength, speed, and perception. Originally, the Unseen Elder was trapped on the continent after the conjunction of spheres, and he has been guarding the gate or portal between the world of the vampires and that of the Witcher world ever since, becoming angry at anyone entering his chamber and disturbing his sleep. This has resulted in many strong and fearsome vampires remaining in the area and helping the cause, but as to how widespread of an issue this really is where this gets a lot more interesting. Because if there's one thing vampires truly care about, it's their food. The better a humanoid's diet, exercise, and lower their stress levels, the better they will taste and the more they will help their vampire brethren when bitten. So could it be that there's a lot more than meets the eye when we consider Toussaint itself? After all, the entire zone almost feels like a paradise in the middle of what is otherwise war-torn, debaucherous, and hellish places full of death, despair, and gloomy weather. But Toussaint is different. It has endless amounts of flavorful wine, a lush color palette, and bustling and thriving cities full of many happy townsfolk living out their days. To some, it may seem like this is actually a good thing, but for the more inquisitive in the community, some have begun to wonder if there's actually a much more sinister undertone beneath it all, which would be very fitting for The Witcher. You see, if you read a lot of the lore entries in game revolving around vampires, it seems clear that Toussaint was one of, if not the first places they settled on the continent, meaning they have been around forever. And over time, the zone has only gotten better and better, while even some of the areas surrounding it directly have succumbed to hardship. Could it be that the vampires that originally came to Toussaint are using it as a sort of breeding ground for themselves, luring in unsuspecting victims by fostering the growth of a paradise of sorts, where the wine is always flowing, the people are always happy, and most importantly, everyone is healthy and fit and in confined areas, the perfect kind of environment for vampires in the universe. Maybe what at first looks like a fairy tale come to life is actually nothing more than one of the most dark and twisted zones we've seen in the Witcher series yet, with entire cities of townsfolk happily living out their lives without knowing that their real fate is to be consumed by all-powerful higher vampire lords that have set up a trap to breed absolute behemoths of war. This would also explain the unbelievable amount of underground tunnels, ruins, and caves beneath Toussaint, as potentially these early vampires have been planning out this facade for some time now. On top of this too, we know that vampires themselves even enjoy wine and blood together, so the massive production of wine in vineyards would have been a big reason for them to stop here in the first place. But regardless of how true this theory really is, ideas like this are, to me at least, what make the Witcher series so great, and get me excited for future installments that might even add more lore and backstory to otherwise mysterious zones. Everyone loves a good mystery, and while the Witcher series is no stranger to baffling and enchanting discoveries, a recent find from the Witcher 3 Next Gen update in 2023 might just be the most enthralling mystery we've ever seen in the series. And also, one of the coolest mysteries I've stumbled upon in my now hundreds of hours doing research on different games for videos like this. After playing around some with the final installment of The Witcher 3, many fans began to notice that there were small amounts of new content that were being added into the game, a fun new quest, some new items, and a lot of little Easter eggs hidden here and there. But recently, just when it seemed like there was nothing new to discover, potentially the biggest revelation ever in the entire Witcher series was found. Located at the destroyed bastion in Velen, just southwest of the crossroads and southeast of the road to the Bald Mountain, these ruins were built during the reign of King Gardic, and then later leveled in the First Nilfgaardian War. But if you actually go to this location now in-game, you'll notice 3 smaller ruins just off the beaten path of the main fort, and within each of these ruins is a lever that you can pull that seemingly does nothing. Once all 3 levers are pulled though, an earth elemental will be summoned in the middle of the towers, and after killing it, Geralt will remark that something strange is going on, followed by a random portal opening up on a nearby hill. At this point, it's almost impossible not to go into that portal, and if you do, you're sent straight to the top of the destroyed bastion, with a pair of stairs and gaping holes leading you downward. And at the very bottom of this structure is a very dark and creepy room, which upon dropping into, immediately an army of unkillable specters are born, which quite literally cannot be vanquished with any known combo in the game. It's because of this that you're forced to run into an adjacent room with an even larger force of immortal hellspawn, and it's in this room that you can activate a portal by casting Ard on 2 crystals in the room, and it's this portal that will teleport you back outside as if nothing ever happened. So something really strange is going on here. What are all these levers doing in the middle of nowhere, and why were they only added into the game as of the most recent update? Does the Earth Elemental have anything to do with this mystery, and what kinds of magics under the destroyed bastion are causing a race to quite literally become immortal? We've never seen something like this. Well, buckle up, because things are about to get a lot more crazy. You see, in that room with the 2 crystals that create a portal back outside, there's actually one more interesting thing we didn't touch on. Because if you bypass both crystals and instead just run to the back of the room, you'll notice a strange symbol on the back wall. No spells or incantations seem to do anything, so it would seem that the mystery would stop here. But let's take a closer look. Here's a zoomed in screenshot of that symbol on the back wall. It's a triangle with a golden crest and 3 circles on each edge, most likely a symbol of the Illuminati or All-Powerful. surrounded by a depiction of Ouroboros, who, for those of you who don't know, is an ancient form of Norse mythology also seen in Greek and Egyptian texts about a snake that eats its own tail, meant to signify eternity and the unity of the beginning and end of time, sometimes meant to warn of the ending of the world. Inside of those circles and outside of the Ouroboros are strange symbols that seem to be saying something, but aren't immediately coherent at all. But keeping in mind that this is the Witcher universe, we can assume that these symbols are actually a form of Elder Writing, which is an ancient language of the continent in The Witcher that is largely based on real-world Glagoltic scripts, which is the oldest known Slavic alphabet in the entire world, created in the 9th century by Saint Cyril, a monk from Thessalonica sent to the Byzantine Emperor in 863. So if we assume these symbols are actually symbolizing this ancient language, we can then translate them into Latin, in which case we get these letter pairings: FF, VQ, BZ, FP, OVE, YAR, KW, GB. Sadly, trying to assort these into any sort of coherent English phrase or sentence seems to be a losing battle, but maybe this translation is only the first step. After all, considering the symbol seems to reference Illuminati and the end of the world, it probably won't be that easy. So next, I tried to run this sequence of letters against multiple popular cipher techniques. For example, Rot13, which is a simple substitution cipher that replaces each letter with an offset of 13 in the alphabet. And while some ciphers did seem to produce somewhat coherent phrases, nothing I tried really made any sense. So I went back and tried running more complex ciphers along with an @bash cryptographic substitution, which would alternate each letter with its opposing sequence in the alphabet, which seemed like a good guess since the Ouroboros symbol could signify that in order to solve the cipher, we need to completely reverse something. But once again, nothing of significant note. I was able to pick up, for example, at one point the phrase sex robots after referencing a Reddit thread on cryptography, but I'm not sure if that's the answer. In order to keep digging though, I started to run this puzzle through different artificial intelligence training models like ChatGPT, which provided some really interesting and impressive guesses at what the solutions could be. But once again, nothing substantial enough to call this case closed, and nothing that really relates to the Witcher universe at all. So maybe sex robots could be the final answer to this puzzle then. It's highly unlikely, unless CD Projekt Red really likes messing with us, but maybe robots who are especially frisky might not be so far off. Because the final piece of this puzzle is another thing I haven't touched on yet. You see, in the center of the strange symbol is a magenta-colored triangle with what looks to be flames, and more importantly, a drawing of multiple lines that twist and converge at the top and bottom. I searched all over the internet looking for a similar symbol or significance of lines like this, but all I could find was that cool S trick I remember from my days back in elementary school, before I spent countless hours researching cryptography and ciphertext in order to solve random online puzzles about video games and lore. I miss those days. What these lines do in fact relate to though, and where this mystery gets even more insane, is that they are the same exact lines used in the FF06B5 statues in Cyberpunk 2077, which is the biggest mystery in any game CD Projekt Red has made to date, one that has entire communities dedicated to solving it who still have yet to figure it out even almost 3 years after the game's initial release. The mystery in Cyberpunk got its name because FF06B5 is actually the color code for magenta, the color of one of the statues with the mystery in game. So considering this Witcher symbol obviously is connected somehow, maybe those original Latin translations are actually a set of obvious color codes to further shed light on this now multi-game spanning mystery. I tried creating ciphers that could translate the original set of Glagoltic letters into the Cyberpunk sequence, and I was in fact successful, but using the translation mechanism on the remaining letters once again didn't produce anything coherent, like any other color codes or phrases, for example. Another idea is that maybe the Latin translation and reversal could be a MAC address of sorts, a computer that could be remoted into and then provide further instructions on how to solve this grand mystery. But once again, I've failed in all of my attempts going down this route. So that's where we are now, with potentially the biggest mystery in the history of not just The Witcher, but CD Projekt Red, and one of the coolest mysteries just in general I've stumbled upon, still being completely unsolved. And considering that this entire mystery likely relates to the end of the world, or an Illuminati-like organization spanning both Cyberpunk and Witcher, something really big is going on here. So I hope someone with better puzzle solving skills is able to figure this one out, because I wasn't able to. And if anyone down below has any ideas, please let me know. Either way though, it's awesome to see that almost a decade after its original release, The Witcher 3, and really the entire series as a whole, still has so many secrets and interesting things to offer. While most players seem to prefer romancing Yennefer in the Witcher games, as she is Geralt's true soulmate, my personal preference is another lovely sorceress, Triss Merigold. But what if Triss Merigold wasn't Triss Merigold at all, but rather an imposter? A completely different human being taking the form of Triss, who is hell-bent on making Geralt fall in love with them. You see, in the books, at one point there's a massive battle on Sodden Hill, where a deadly fireball lands right where a group of mages are standing. Amongst these mages are Triss Merigold and many others, including Lydia Ned, better known as Coral. And she was only able to survive with horrible scarring to her body that made her almost unrecognizable, which were later healed. But what if that survivor wasn't Triss Merigold at all, but rather Coral? For starters, Triss was described as having chestnut hair and blue eyes, but in the games, we see Triss actually having red hair and green eyes. And guess who also had red hair and green eyes? Coral. We find further evidence in the books too if we follow them in chronological order, because in the novel Sword and Destiny, we learn that Geralt simply thought Triss and himself liked each other, but nothing more. But in the follow-up book Blood and Elves, which takes place after the event on Sodden Hill, Triss can be seen tossing and turning in bed at one point, remembering how much she loves Geralt and when she tried to seduce him. But wait a second, we never heard about Triss trying to seduce Geralt in previous books. But guess who we did? Coral. So could it be that Coral is actually assuming the identity of Triss Merigold after that fateful fight on Sodden Hill? Maybe, but then the question becomes why? Well, we know from the books that Coral fell madly in love with Geralt at some point, but that the feeling was not mutual, and this destroyed her inside. And we also know that Coral thought Geralt and Triss had a very strong love affair going on, when in reality, it wasn't as strong as she thought. So could it be that after the battle at Sodden Hill, Coral, or Lydia Ned, saw her chance to find her way into Geralt's heart again by becoming the woman she thought he loved? Seeing that the real Triss Merigold and all of the other mages had perished, and because of her extensive scars from the battle, Coral would have known she could have acted as if she was Triss Merigold, and during the healing process after the fact, could have slowly tried to form herself into as much of the image of her as possible, with the exclusion of her hair and eyes. In fact, another strange occurrence is that after the battle on Sodden Hill, Triss stopped wearing such revealing clothing, claiming that she was self-conscious because of her scars. But we can see from the healing process that they seem to have healed quite nicely. What if the real reason she didn't want to wear revealing clothing was because she was hiding something else? A fish tattoo on her lower body that would prove she was in fact Coral, not Triss Merigold. The reason she couldn't have gotten rid of this during the healing process is that Coral was actually allergic to the chemical mixture in the Witcher universe used to remove tattoos, as we learn in The Witcher 2. And this would also explain why Triss mysteriously gets sick leaving Kaer Morhen in the books, because maybe it was actually Coral and she was finally taking the mixture to get rid of the tattoos and barely survived in the process. So could it be that Triss Merigold is actually an imposter? Could it be that Coral was tricking us the entire time, trying to make us fall in love with a person who's been dead for some time now? In The Witcher 3, during one of the romance scenes with Triss, she actually takes Geralt to a lighthouse to watch ships. This is exactly what Coral did to Geralt in some of the older books. Triss also used hydromancy in-game, which is a rare form of magic that Coral was especially known for, not Triss. Another interesting coincidence, for sure. And finally, the smoking gun is that there's some dialogue scenes in-game as well, specifically with the Jade figurine, where Triss is referred to as Coral instead of Triss, which is later revealed to be an honest mistake. But what if it was actually CD Projekt Red trying to tell us something? To me, this is one of the most riveting theories out there. The idea that one of the women we can fall in love with in the games is actually a completely different woman who is masquerading as someone else in order to win us over. It paints the entire Triss romance and story in a different light. It's a lot more creepy when you realize she may actually be Coral, or it could just be that some of the lore between the books and the games didn't quite transfer over correctly. But to me, it seems pretty clear that regardless of what's going on with Triss, there's more than meets the eye. During my favorite quests in The Witcher, Through time and space, we get to take Geralt through multiple portals opened by Avallac'h to the worlds that have been decimated by the conjunction of spheres and the White Frost. And one of these, potentially the most interesting of all of them, is a toxic-like planet filled with red algae, massive rock structures, open valleys stretching miles, and a toxic mist that blankets the ground, hugging it close as it moves slowly through the environment. As to what exactly this planet was or what happened here, it's hard to say. But what we can tell is that this planet is no longer what it used to be. If you listen closely during the quest, near the ground you can even pick up on some sounds of supposed creatures hiding in the cavities of the soil. But even more captivating is the fact that something about this planet just feels off. At many times it almost feels like we are being watched by someone or something, and the more you look into and study the environment, the more you begin to realize that what we are looking at here is probably not just a normal world, but a world that used to be one massive ocean. Those red algae scattered throughout the ground are the exact same kinds we find on the ocean floor and the continent. And those massive rock structures start to make a lot more sense when you realize that they were probably underwater many years ago, instead of just somehow forming naturally on the surface. The real smoking gun here though is a massive fossil of a giant sea creature we can find on the ground floor. It looks like a whale or other type of massive aquatic mammal based on its shape and size, and it's obvious that this monster would have needed a healthy amount of water to survive, as moving on land with this shape and size would be nigh on impossible. Where this gets really crazy though is that we can actually find a matching fossil in The Witcher 3 as well on the continent, once again simply being a fossilized massive creature near a swamp. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the most likely answer would probably be that this giant whale-like creature used to be indigenous to this massive underwater utopia we traveled to. But during the conjunction of the spheres, some of them were thrust through a wormhole into the world of The Witcher, from which the ones that landed in the sea most likely survived, and those that landed on land were fossilized for future races to find, like us. Does that mean at one point massive whales were quite literally raining from the sky on the continent? And even more interestingly, could some of these creatures from this mysterious planet now actually be alive in the oceans bordering the continent today? Maybe some of the tales of travelers finding massive monsters at sea are actually humans stumbling upon interdimensional alien warlords whose planet is now a toxic wasteland. God, I love Witcher lore. A lot of people's favorite portion of The Witcher 3 is actually the first act, where we get to stroll around Velen and its evil and assuming bogs to track down some of the most twisted and captivated storytelling in the series. But whatever your capstone moment is for the story in this zone, it probably revolves around the Crones. Also known as the Ladies of the Woods, the Crones are 3 witches that live in a cabin in the swamps of Velen, and use different humans as hosts to communicate and do their bidding. During the main questline with these Crones, we actually have an opportunity to either free or kill their arch nemesis in the lands, a strange and seemingly evil spirit of a long-lost druid stuck in a great tree. This demonic force, referred to as the Mother in the quest text, asks Geralt to free it, and if you do, it will in turn free the orphans that the Crones have under their control, but this will also result in the death of the Bloody Baron and others most likely. Should you choose to help the Mother under this giant tree called the Whispering Hillock though, one of the things the spirit will ask for is a black horse, which is significant because that makes this story directly relate to lots of Celtic folklore about Mother Nature itself, in which stories of a black horse signify death and dark forces. On top of this, in Celtic lore, great trees would also be named by druids of each tribe and watched over meticulously. And not only that, the black horse in Celtic lore is the patron animal of the Elder Tree, a tree of great power and grandeur, a tree like the Whispering Hillock. Could it be that the spirit referred to as the Mother and the Crones referred to as the Ladies of the Wood are actually a symbolic representation of Mother Nature itself, a combination of the two names? We can even find this text in-game called She Who Knows that sheds more light on this mystery. Folks say they were 4 at first. The Mother, she who knows, the Lady of the Wood, came here from a faraway land and, since she suffered terribly from loneliness, she made 3 daughters out of dirt and water. A long, long time ago, the Mother was sole ruler of all of Velen. Her daughters brought her the people's request and served as her voice. Each spring, sacrifices of grain, animals, and men were made to the Lady of the Wood on her special night. Yet as the years passed, the Lady of the Wood slipped deeper and deeper into madness. Her madness eventually spread over the land. Men took to abandoning their homes and settling out into the bog, where they became food for beasts. Before long, Velen was drowning in blood. The daughters saw their land nearing destruction and took it upon themselves to save it. When spring came once more, and with it the night sacrifices, they killed their mother and buried her in the bog. Her blood watered the oak atop Ard's Serban. And from then on, the tree grew wholesome and hearty fruit for the people. As for the lady's immortal soul, it refused to leave its beloved land, and so the sisters imprisoned it. To this day, it lies trapped beneath the whispering hillock, where it thrashes about in powerless rage. Could it be that at one point the crones crossed nature itself or some all-powerful druid? And if so, what sort of power could this being actually have to the point that it could rule all of Velen and the crones alike? What exactly is the mother, and by releasing her, what have we set forth onto the world? Well, if it's Mother Nature itself that the crones captured, as the Celtic lore would imply, then we are likely to see many great and horrific things alike in the future. The world of The Witcher is just one of an infinite amount of universes, parallel realities, and spheres of dimension that at one point were much more easily traversed. But after the conjunction of the spheres, this ease of traversal cascaded into nothingness, with many realities either joining together or disappearing entirely. Nowadays, the only known route between universes is known as the spiral, with some creatures such as unicorns being amongst the only things that can still travel between dimensions nowadays easily. Children of the Blood like Ciri being another. But with a universe of infinite spheres of dimensions, that also comes with infinite possibilities, of which many have been speculated on. For example, Geralt joining Fortnite wasn't just some fun crossover for money. I mean, technically it was, but it actually makes sense in Witcher lore for this to happen in a parallel universe. And in fact, that means that somewhere out there, Geralt has been getting dubs and making 10-year-olds cry for years now. My true hero. A personal favorite realization of mine, though, is that toxic planet from the Through Time and Space quest could actually be the planet 451b from Subnautica many years into the future, meaning there's another big crossover we haven't yet become aware of, and maybe the Witcher world is actually full of Subnautica wildlife in the seas. Crazy possibilities like this are endless, and my imagination goes wild with all the crossovers that could happen. But for now, I'm happy with just the one reality we do get to play as in the games because it's so fleshed out and fun. Most of the love for the Witcher series probably comes from the third game. And it makes sense. It's the biggest release the series has had to date, and it's one of the biggest RPGs ever made in general. And at the time, it quite literally revolutionized the genre and just how good games could be. But that doesn't mean everything else about the game series isn't great too. Whether it be all the books, live action shows, or the first two games as well, most of the art created in the Witcher universe so far has been great. For me though, the one thing that everyone seems to be sleeping on in the Witcher series is The Witcher Tales Thronebreaker. It's a game based entirely around the card game Gwent, where you must lead Queen Meve of Lyria on a conquest to win her kingdom back, all while meeting with many different people and creatures alike. It tells one of the most riveting stories in the entire series, and the writing is just as good as any of the best quests from Witcher 3. But for me, what makes it even better is the gameplay. While on its initial release, I always found Witcher 3 to be boring to play, only changing my opinion there in the recent next-gen edition, Thronebreaker from day one has been one of the best experiences I have ever had in card games, bar none. And I get that not everyone is into card games, but I truly beg anyone who's listening to this, if you're even sort of interested in Gwent or Witcher alike, you have to try this game. Because it's a shame that it never got the sequels that were originally planned, and that it deserved, and that it didn't get more love. It has those same compelling, morally great choices from the mainline series, with awesome consequences that this time also affect gameplay, since someone leaving or joining your group could mean you gaining or losing some of your most favorite and powerful cards alike in battle. The writing is immaculate, the art style is superb, the story is riveting the whole way through, and the gameplay really makes you think about all of the choices you're making, because not only do they impact the story fundamentally, but also how you play the game itself. I no joke think this is one of the best RPGs ever made, and I personally like it even more than The Witcher 3, and that's including the next gen edition. It's the game that originally made me fall in love with this universe, something even the all-time mainline greats couldn't do at first. So maybe the biggest theory of all is just why one of the greatest games ever made didn't get the love it deserves, and how such a great product never got its time to shine. And as always, thank you guys so much for the support. These videos take a ton of research and work, so I appreciate everyone who watches, shares, and just likes the content. Let me know down below in the comments any other Witcher theories I didn't touch on that you guys are super fascinated by, or what games you want to see me cover next. I really enjoy making these. It's a ton of work, but it really feels awesome putting this out for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, have a great day.